There we go. Good morning.
Oh,
I feel like that Sprint commercial. Can you hear me now? Good morning. Happy Father's Day. How many of you, were at the gala last night? Fantastic party, huh? We have a good time? So happy Father's Day. A father of 4 teenage boys had won a new Xbox at a raffle. And he called all of his boys together in the living room to ask which of them should have the Xbox. He said, so I'm going to ask you these questions. Who among you is the most obedient? Who among you never talks back to your mother? Who does everything she says? In unison, all 4 boys answered, okay, Dad, you get the Xbox. Well, I don't have 4 teenage sons, but I have 2 teenage sons. And they were both at the gala last night. And my 15, almost 16-year-old son, Jesse, ran the computer at the auction. And he was amazing. He was invaluable. And my 13-year-old son was also invaluable because Reverend Jay had put together this beautiful PowerPoint with music and with pictures from our 10 years here, and it kept crashing on him, and he couldn't get to work. And Tyler said, I can fix it. And he did. And he actually, it was amazing. He actually turned it into a manual PowerPoint so that Geronimo could go through and fix it. So today's a day that we honor fathers and fatherhood. And this day in June is set aside for us to honor fathers in this country. But here at GTC, notice how I threw that in, here at GTC, the Global Truth Center, we don't honor fathers because it's Father's Day or because there's a sale at Macy's or because it's a national holiday. We are spiritually honoring the Father within each of us. I and the Father are one. And as Reverend Jamie said during his meditation this morning, both in Aramaic and English, and my song, I and the Father are one, this is what we teach, that I and the Father are one. This is what Jesus taught. You believe this? A guy who grew up Jewish standing on a pulpit saying, this is what Jesus taught. You believe that? I and the Father are one. As New Thought thinkers, we understand how this cause and effect universe works. Creative intelligence, spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, the Father within, has a creative urge to express and expand itself, to manifest, and it does this through a creative aspect of itself because there's only one thing. I and the Father are one. And the way that God uses this creative power in the macro is exactly the same way that we use this creative power in the micro. Okay, we and the Father are one. So that's the mechanical nature of the universe. If you plant carrots, you get carrots. If you plant green beans, you get green beans. If you spiritually plant prosperity, abundance, love, great relationships in your life, you get prosperity, abundance, love, great relationships. You also have the choice to plant lack and limitation. That is our choice. We can use this creative process every day in our lives, and we do. Whatever we plant in the spiritual mind, in the spiritual soil of the universe, that's what grows in our life. I and the Father are one. And you know, James and I were talking about this morning. It's very easy to become a father. It's much harder to be a father. I mean, think about it. Biologically, in the universal sense, becoming a father, procreation, is the male's only job. Really. And we're designed that way. I mean, did you ever think about why sex is so much fun? It's because the universe wants us to procreate. I mean, think about it. In nature, the females do everything, right? They hunt, they gather, they bear the young, they raise the young. The male's only role is to father, to provide the biological seed to continue the species lineage. That's all that the males do. But in our society, we've grown a society for the last 20,000 years where family, the family unit, is important. So our role as parents, both male and female, is to love, to nurture, to guide. The same role that many spiritual faiths and philosophies attribute to a divine father, to a divine mother. Now, both of Reverend Sharon's and my sons, Jesse, who I said is almost 16 and will be in September, and Tyler, who's going to be 13 next month, they're both, interestingly enough, right now in the process of changing schools. And both for the same reason, to be in a better situation, to have a better life, more good in their life. Now, Jesse, who has been in an independent study high school program for the last year and done fantastically well. Straight A student, more than straight A with all the AP classes and honors classes he's taken. But he has been alone in an independent study. So he spent most of the entire last year in his room, at the computer with his guitar in his hand and an iPhone and a Game Boy. I'd walk in and say, "How can you study this way?" He's like, "How can you argue with my grades?" I can't, Now, I couldn't do it that way. When I'm in the studio and I'm working, I have to do like one thing at a time. What do we say in Mental Muscle? That multitasking is the enemy of efficiency. Well, to these kids whose brains are wired differently and who've lived their entire lives in a world where the World Wide Web is part of their everyday experience. Tyler and I are in the car on the way to the gala last night, and I said, "Oh, I got to put the address of the castaways into the GPS, because I remember how to get there, but I like to see how much time it's going to take me to get there, because I promised everybody I'd be there at 6 with the PA system. So I like to know, am I on schedule?" And Tyler's like, "Okay, iPhone, Castaways, Burbank, Harvard Avenue." It's like they never lived in a world that didn't have the World Wide Web. Tyler, on the other hand, is also changing schools, but he's been in a school that he just plain doesn't like. And while he's socially very popular, academically he's not very happy. And you figure out the rest of that. So as a father, of course, I want to do the best that I can do. And today's service is helmed. It's not just Father's Day here at the Global Truth Center. It's Founding Father's Day, because the service is really helmed by 3 of the 4 founding fathers. If there's 3 founding families, the Kleins, the Earl LeBeaus, and the Mellon Baileys, well, Reverend Jamie did the meditation, and Reverend James and I are doing the music and splitting up the talk. And the only founding father who's not here is Kevin Bailey, because he's in New York very busily producing a Broadway show. Have you heard that, by the way, that he's in New York producing? Yeah, that was the first Broadway reference today, and I did it. And as Reverend James will point out anytime, that makes me an honorary gay minister. Honorary. So, I love acronyms, and Reverend Jamie and I were talking this week about an acronym for Father's Day. So between us, we came up with this. See if you like this. Father. Family allows the heart endless rejoicing. You like that? Family allows the heart endless rejoicing. Fathers want to do what's right for their kids, but as I said before, it's a lot easier to become a father than it is to be a father. Last Sunday on the way to church, Reverend Sharon and I were listening to NPR, Weekend Edition, as we often do on our way to church, and there was a great story on Weekend Edition about Tim McGraw, the country star Tim McGraw, who was talking about his new CD. But he was also asked about parenting, because not only is he married to Faith Hill, and they have 3 beautiful daughters, but he's also the son of the famous MLB baseball pitcher Tug McGraw. And the interesting story about this, and he said, and I'll quote him, she asked him how both being married to Faith Hill and being the son of Tug McGraw affected him being a parent, and he said, "Well, I think it certainly made me a better parent. I don't know if you can ever say you're a good parent. I think you try your best, but I think if you hit it half of 50% of the time, then you feel like you might be doing okay, because you make a lot of mistakes as a parent." Did anybody ever tell him that half of 50% is 25%? I don't know. In country music, they do things a little differently. They use numbers charts. If you go to the CSL Nashville, they use numbers charts. So I was intrigued by his story, because they didn't really go into how he met his dad and all that. So I looked it up, and I found out, interestingly enough, so Tim McGraw's mother was an 18-year-old high school senior and a waitress at a diner in Jacksonville, Florida, where she lived with her mom and dad. And in the apartment directly above her lived 22-year-old Tug McGraw, who was a minor league pitcher in Jacksonville. And they dated, and she got pregnant, and her parents sent her away to Tennessee to have the baby. And she didn't have a relationship with Tug McGraw after that. And so for the first 11 years of his life, Tim McGraw thought that his stepfather was his father. And then at Christmas time in 1978, he was looking through his mother's closet for Christmas presents, and he found his birth certificate. And he found that the name on his birth certificate was Tug McGraw, who was by that time, a very famous MLB pitcher whose baseball card was on the wall of his son's bedroom. So he brought that to his mother, and she said, "Yes, Tug McGraw is your father," and she made an appointment for him to go and meet his father. But at that time, Tug denied his paternity, and he really broke Tim's heart. And for the next 5 or 6 years, he was kind of depressed, and he started writing a lot of what would become very famous country songs. But interestingly enough, when Tim graduated from high school, his mother sent Tug his high school graduation picture saying, I know you say that you're not this kid's father, but here's his. Well, when Tug looked at the picture and saw that his son's picture looked not only exactly like him, but like his father, he couldn't deny, he couldn't deny it anymore. So at that time, Tim was 18, 19 years old, and he started having a father-son relationship with Tug. But he said, he often felt like he was the father and Tug was the son, because Tug was a perpetual 16-year-old. I had that kind of a relationship with my dad, too, that I felt that I was the father a lot and that he was the son, especially when I grew up. So you're probably wondering why I'm telling you this story about Tim McGraw and Tug McGraw on Father's Day 2013. 2013 is the year that we are intended to be seen. And as the Global Truth Center, we are making a point of putting ourselves out there and saying, I am God. This is what the truth of my being is. I and the Father are one. It's harder to be a father than it is to become a father. And in that exact same way, it's easy for us to become God because we're born that way. We're born individualizing the divine. It's harder for us to live as God because there's a lot of fear, angst, and old messages that go along with that idea. When, since the time that we've been doing church here at the NoHo Art Center, or Sunday morning service, or whatever you want to call it, because the words all have meanings from where we came from. I know that from the very first Sunday, the very first Christmas Eve service, 2003, when James would get up and say, I am God, and Sharon, who was also brought up Catholic, would say, you can't say that. People will just walk out the door, and James would say, if someone's meant to be here and hear this message, they will be here and hear this message. So in 2013, which is our year to be seen, we don't shy away from the message, I am God, you are God. It is easier to be born as God than to live as God because we all are born as God. To live as God, that's our job. So my talk title today was Tugs, T-U-G-S, and it was mostly for the lesson of Tim McGraw and Tug McGraw, but it was also to remember, it's another acronym, that the truth is that you and God are the same. Tugs, T-U-G-S. The truth is that you, I took a little artistic license there, you and God are the same. You already are and will always be divine. You were born that way. You were born and made of God's stuff, the building blocks of God's body, the universe. You have a choice, just like Tug McGraw had a choice to acknowledge his paternity of Tim McGraw or not. And today, Father's Day, our first Sunday as the Global Truth Center, you can choose to accept the truth of who you really are, who you were born to be, God. Today is Father's Day. The truth is that you and God are the same. Give yourself the best Father's Day present, and remember, I and the Father are one. Namaste.
Beautiful. I have to tell you something that's funny. As I was sitting next to Sharon and Doug was doing his talk, and when he said that the man's only job was to procreate, the male's only job was to procreate, and the women did everything else, I was sitting next to Sharon, and she's going, uh-huh.